Hey, and this is Ron,
And this is Galina.
and we're in the art scene. Welcome back.
Welcome back to our podcast.
We've got a great show for you today. A little bit different than our usual artist, although I don't know if there's any such thing as a usual artist, but this is a little bit different.
Yeah, this is one of those episodes when we're bringing someone who is not considering themselves a professional artist, yet he's got a great outlook and great opinion on the creativity, the creative process, and he is taking it way different from your typical artist in the way that I know it.
Yeah, it's a very different approach to creating, if you will, and I think we'll be spoiling it if we say anything more than that. So we invite you to sit back, relax, grab a snack and a drink, and enjoy, or if you're driving, beverage in your cup holder, but enjoy this interview with someone who by day has been a surgeon.
Yes, he is retired doctor, OBGYN surgeon. His name is Homer Chen. He is our local San Diegan, and the rest let Homer speak for himself.
So here we go, in the art scene with Homer Chen.
We are talking today to Homer Chen, who is a friend of ours and an amazing painter that we have discovered accidentally.
Yeah, so one of the things we like to do on In the Art Scene is talk to people who are not necessarily artists by vocation, but artists because they love to do it and they do it on the side.
And do it awesome.
And do it very well. And amazingly well. And Homer, you are a retired doctor, OBGYN, correct? Is that right?
Correct. I'm probably, to be accurate, I'm probably 90% retired. I'm no longer seeing patients. I'm no longer performing surgery, but I'm still doing some consulting work that actually takes up a fair amount of my time.
Okay, so you have a busy clinical job by day, and then at other times when you're free, you pour time and energy into your passion.
One of my passions. The other vice I have is tennis. I play a lot of tennis, and that actually interferes quite a bit with painting. After playing 2 hours of tennis, the last thing you want to do is come home and shower up and start painting. It's difficult to do that.
And probably your shoulders are sore. And
well, mentally, it's more of a mental thing than a physical thing.
Oh.
So
you have to be in a different headspace.
Correct.
And do you play tennis pretty competitively? I guess there's no other way to play.
I do. Well, when I was still working full time, I played maybe 2 or 3 times a week, and now I'm playing about 5, sometimes 6 times a week.
So that leaves you 1 day a week to paint.
Yeah, essentially.
Is that enough?
It isn't. But, one of the things that has kind of decreased the amount that I'm painting is that I've always found in the past that I painted better and I enjoyed painting if I worked in a group. So since I kind of started painting formally, I studied with a couple of teachers, and we would get together in groups of, not huge groups, but groups of, maybe 5 or 8 other students, varying experience, painting different things. It wasn't a situation where I went to class and the teacher pulled out a tree and said, well, let's all paint this tree. We kind of did our own thing, and the teacher would go around and critique. And I found that I was much more motivated to paint in a group type setting where we kind of compared notes and critiqued each other. And, that was much more enjoyable. And I haven't found a class to continue with. Unfortunately, the last teacher that I had, Catherine Grawlin, passed away from cancer a couple of years ago. And that's left a couple of us kind of, in a limbo, so to speak.
Is that how you originally learned how to paint in a group setting? Is that how it started?
Well, I've always, as a kid, I always enjoyed drawing. I remember spending, if I wasn't playing basketball or softball, I remember spending a lot of time drawing boats and cars and airplanes and things of that sort. but I never had any formal training. And I'd always been interested in oil painting. And one of my close friends, who you probably know, Mark Fellman,
Yes.
who's a very accomplished plein air painting, invited myself and Vicky to a student show that was kind of put together by his teacher, who was Leela Hardy at that time. And Leela would, put together a show of maybe once or twice a year, kind of showcasing the paintings and the works of her students. And so Mark invited me to that. And I remember going to that and saying, well, yeah, I'd love to do this, So I talked to Leela a little bit, and fortunately she accepted me as a student, and she was basically my first teacher. I spent probably about 9 years with her.
Wow. And that was in 2004, right?
2003, 2004, something like that. And then she moved her studio and had a couple of months of a hiatus. And I kind of saw that as a sign to maybe look for another teacher. I think that with anything else, whether it's painting or sports or whatever, you get so much out of a teacher. And then after a while, you should probably move on and get some different ideas.
I have a question. What is it about group setting that you find so motivating and fulfilling?
Well, I think one thing is the discipline. It's very simple. When you pay for classes and you've kind of enrolled in a class, you basically tend to show up. Whereas if you said to yourself, "Well, I'm going to try to paint 2 hours a day," well, those 2 hours a day gets kind of pushed around a little bit. You might have some errands to run. You might not feel like painting. You might want to read the paper instead or read a book instead. So it's kind of easier to procrastinate, so to speak.
Yeah, I feel you.
I recently started taking online bass lessons from a teacher who's in Buenos Aires, of all places. That's the magic of online these days. And I don't get much time during the week to get my practice in, but you can be darn sure come Saturday morning, I'll be cramming for my Saturday afternoon bass class. So it forces me to have at least some amount of discipline and get some practice in every week.
Oh, I was terrible with that. I would, even with classes, which were once a week. I remember taking 3 hours of classes on Saturday. Classes are not quite enough, as you know. You really have to kind of paint on your own. And so I did that, but I found that I crammed a little bit more if I had a show to kind of prepare for, a student show. I would paint like madly for weeks and weeks just to get everything ready. I think the other thing about classes is that I really enjoyed the people that I painted with. They came from all walks of life, and kind of like myself. They didn't start out as artists. They may not even have considered themselves artistic. There are people who came from the business world, the people who were accountants, there were teachers that I met, and they're all kind of good people. And, there was not any ounce of competitiveness. We were all kind of there to kind of enjoy painting, and we would often look at each other's paintings and say, well, I like the way you did that. I'm going to kind of try to incorporate that with my next painting. Or that was kind of a nice way of doing something that looked kind of hard to do. It's kind of a teamwork in a sense, although we weren't working on the same project.
That's an interesting point, Homer, because often we think about painting as an individualistic pursuit. Self-expression and something that someone does in their studio alone for hours on end and whatnot. But this is a very different dynamic. You talked about teamwork in painting. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because that might be a different perspective than some of us have about this.
Well, I thought about this a little bit, and a lot of people look at painting as being something that is creative. And I've often thought about that, and I said, well, it's not really that creative unless you're creating something from your mind. What I do, and what a lot of painters do, is they paint from a scene. Now, a scene may be a plein air scene. It may be a photograph. It could be another painting. But there's a reference point, and you paint from that reference point. You're not creating that reference point. It's kind of like analogous to people who play piano. People who play piano very well, I don't necessarily consider creative. I consider the people who are creative the people who write the music. But to take a sheet music and to play it well is certainly admirable. It takes a lot of skill, but I'm not sure that I would consider it creative. So in a sense, just like piano playing, I think a lot of painting is, kind of for lack of a better term, is very technical. It's problem solving. It's basically looking at something and whether it's a picture or a plein air scene, looking at something and saying, well, how can I get what I see onto the canvas in a way that is pleasing to the eye? And there are all sorts of techniques for that. I mean, painting, learning how to paint is basically learning different techniques and learning kind of the basic concepts of color and value and drawing and things of that sort. So everybody has little tricks that they utilize. And I think that gets back to what made it fun and what made it educational to be with other painters to kind of see how they tackled a particular problem.
This is very interesting to me personally because I have experience in both. And I do enjoy my solitude in the studio and painting. I do use reference points sometimes, and sometimes I just use my imagination. It depends on the mood. But the sense of community that you're pointing at is indeed very important, even if it's just some people online or some other friends, painters who I know are, giving support or giving critique, or we're just chit-chatting and discussing new ideas or new techniques and other things. That's really rewarding and supporting in the way. And another thing that was interesting to me and what you're saying is that this is more about the skill and solving problems for you than a creative outlet. So I kind of always like to think that whatever creative outlet you're having, whether it's painting or any other craft or arts, is more about switching from the left brain to the right brain and kind of, let yourself play and experiment and do other things. For you, it seems to be more of the left brain activity because that's about skill and learning and catching some techniques that other people use and really solving the problem, which for you is a visual puzzle, pretty much putting something aesthetically pleasing on the canvas using the reference points and techniques that you have learned. Is that?
Yeah, I think that there's a little bit, I think for the most part, that's true. I think as I've kind of developed as a painter, I've kind of allowed myself to infuse a little bit more creativity. I'll change scenes, for example. I'll say, well, this doesn't look quite right here, so I'll kind of get rid of it and move it over here. Or maybe I'll see two photos and I'll say, well, those two photos would go together pretty well. It'd be nice to kind of put together this person on the beach with this person. They may be from different photographs, but I can kind of do that. But I think when I first started painting, I was kind of tied to the left brain. As I said earlier, painting for me I looked at it as being problem solving. And I used to do, when I was working, my passion was basically surgery. And surgery is very kind of problem solving as well. How do I get this tumor out without damaging an adjacent organ, things of that sort. So it's very kind of goal-oriented and kind of very technical. You can't really be, well, you can be innovative, but you can't really allow yourself to be too creative when you're doing surgery. You can't basically say, oh, yeah, I'm gonna try this, this technique that's never been tried before, and I'm going to experiment on this patient. Well, you really can't do that, so.
Well, we're glad that you didn't do that.
Right.
The paint canvas is a much safer place to do that.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, Homer, if tennis shares anything in common with that. I mean, that's a technical proficiency exercise as well.
It does. It does. There are many people who play recreational tennis, and I don't play in tournaments or things of that sort, but I'm very analytical when it comes to technique. I look at my technique and I compare my technique with pros, and there are all sorts of YouTube videos nowadays, and there are all sorts of online tennis instruction websites that you can look at, and very much like my painting, I think that even though I'm not a youngster anymore, I think that I've improved with my tennis. I'm a better player now than I was 10 years ago.
Well, I can attest as someone who's getting on in years as well that technical proficiency can make up a lot for athleticism, or as your athletic abilities change, the ability to be more efficient and more strategic with your playing or your painting or whatever you do more than makes up for what someone can do with pure athleticism alone.
Well, there's this other saying that I have that we often kind of verbalize on a tennis court, and that is, it's often better to be lucky than good. But that doesn't apply. That might apply to painting, but it doesn't apply to medicine or surgery.
Yeah. I think I've been more lucky on the tennis court than good myself, but and I won't be playing you anytime soon. But I'm wondering, Homer, if now that you've been painting for a while and you geeked out on the technical, which I can relate to as well. I do that with bass guitar playing and all the YouTube videos I watch. I'm wondering if you do sometimes just fully want to just be creative and let the technique go and express from your mind. Does that occur? And what does that feel like if it does?
It probably doesn't occur as much as I would like for it to occur. I don't think I would do very well if someone said, well, I like for you to kind of switch from the type of painting that you do, which I consider to be very traditional. And I like for you to do abstract painting. And I'd like for you to kind of paint from your head or from your mind rather than painting from a reference. I think I would probably be lost at that, So that's just me. I think that I might actually become a better painter if I allowed myself to do that or forced myself to do that. I was once told, and I think it's true, I was once told that a good painter can paint in different styles depending on what he and she wanted to do. So a good painter can paint very tightly and paint in such a way that the art is almost photographic. And that same painter can, just by flipping a switch, paint more abstractly. But I'm not able to do that yet.
The key word being yet.
Or ever.
Well, I would argue that if you don't have any desire to do that, there's nothing wrong with that.
No, I agree. I mean, I paint for my enjoyment. I don't paint to kind of show people, hey, this is what I can do. I don't feel the need to kind of expand kind of what I do. I think I have enough challenges kind of painting what I like to paint and what I enjoy painting.
And your paintings are beautiful. They're absolutely beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, they do have that flair of a very traditional oil painting, the still life, and the beach scenes are, they're all cute. But you do definitely have your own style. I mean, it's very recognizable. The way you're putting the colors together, it's especially your still life, very bold colors, and at the same time, very fine strokes. I was studying the photographs that you sent us, and I barely could find any brush strokes. It's so smooth.
Well, I think I don't think that's necessarily good.
I don't think it's good or bad. It's who you are as a painter.
Yeah. I think my style has changed a little bit. If you look at the Blogspot, and I don't have a website, but if you look at the Blogspot, the paintings kind of go chronologically. So the paintings at the end are the earlier paintings, and paintings in the beginning are the more recent ones. And I used to be, I mean, I still am to a degree, but I used to be very tight. So if you look at some of the older paintings, there were a lot of kind of straight, distinct lines. And I've tried to kind of get away from that. One of my teachers said at one point that I had eagle eyes. And what she meant by that was that I had a keen sense of observation. But that wasn't necessarily a compliment. You would normally think, well, shoot, she's complimenting me. Well, it wasn't said in a complimentary way. I think it's fine to be able to see detail, but I think that as a good painter, you have to have some restraint and keep yourself from painting every single thing that you see. You've got to leave some of the detail out, and you've got to let the viewer of the painting kind of fill in the blanks. For example, if you were to paint a tree, you don't want to paint each individual leaf. That's not a painterly type of effort. Instead, you want to paint shapes. So when you look at paintings that are done by, very famous and very accomplished landscape painters, when you look at their trees, you don't see leaves. You see basically shapes. You see blocks. And those blocks don't really exist in nature, but they really work. And they work because you're allowing the viewer to kind of fill in the details. You're not painting every single little detail. You're allowing some interpretation on the part of the viewer. One of the tricks that, and Colleen, you probably know this too, but one of the tricks that all of my teachers have mentioned is that when you look at your reference point to paint, you should squint. Instead of looking at it with open eyes, you squint. And by squinting, you basically force yourself to not see all of the details.
Yeah. You blur and your vision a little bit and kind of see more of the generic shapes, and that's what you want to reference. Yeah.
Exactly.
Another good trick, and maybe you want to try it as could be a good challenge for you creatively. Try to flip your reference photo upside down and paint it this way.
Oh, I've often done that.
Oh, you have?
Yeah, that actually works very well. I don't do that all the time. I do that when I paint figures, because with figures, your mind and your preconceptions sometimes get in the way. You see a head and you say, well, this head is above the neck and it should be so big, so I'm going to paint a round head. Well, that head may not be round. It may not sit exactly where you envision it sitting. So a lot of figures, if I do a figure painting, lots of times I will paint upside down, and that works incredibly well.
That's very interesting.
Now, switching gears here a little bit, do you sell any of your art? Is there any monetary piece to your passion?
Very little. I have, when I was taking classes with Leela, she would, as I mentioned earlier, she would put together a show kind of showcasing her students' paintings, and they would be for sale. And she would have that maybe once a year or maybe once every 2 years. So during the time that I was with her, which was probably a good 9-10 years, I probably participated in a number of student shows, and I would sell paintings. And I've also participated in just 2 art walks. You probably know about art walks. There's one that the original one started in Little Italy, and then they've expanded to Liberty Station. So I've done that twice and sold paintings there. I've had friends buy paintings. I've had people, friends of mine or friends of friends, ask me to do commission work. So I've done that a couple of times. But I don't, maybe it's kind of because I'm too lazy, but I don't have a website, so I don't really promote myself, and I don't really see it as a business.
About your teachers and specifically about critiques, because you mentioned a few times how teachers approach the students and make comments that are not necessarily complimentary, but they, a form of critique that is supposed to make you a better painter. So what is your take on all of that? How do you deal with critiques? What kind of experience did you have with teachers' critique? Because I know that depending on the teacher and the student, sometimes it can be really hard and discouraging, and some other teachers can make it the opposite, very encouraging experience. So what's your take on that whole concept and your personal experience with teaching critiques that you received?
Well, personally, I really enjoyed teachers who were supportive, but also critical, and also teachers who didn't really mince words in terms of critiquing your paintings. It doesn't seem to me that it would be very helpful for someone to come by and basically say, well, you're doing great. I love what you're doing. You're doing great. I've got nothing to add. That doesn't really kind of advance you as a painter. And different teachers I've found, and I've worked with, two for a long period of time and then one for a short period of time. Different teachers have different approaches. They also have different techniques and different preferences. For example, Leela Hardy, who I spent, again, my first teacher, who I spent a good 10 years with, was a real proponent of getting the canvas covered. She used to always say that. She would always say, well, I want you to, in the first hour or two, get all the paint on the canvas, and then go back and correct it later on. The most important thing is to get everything on the paintings, get everything on the canvas so you can see the proportions and kind of see where things sit. So she was a real proponent of that. My second teacher, Catherine Grauman, I spent about 5 years with her. She was a real, colorist. She would emphasize harmony in color. And that was really helpful for me. She basically was of the mindset that you should try to mix as many colors as you can with as few colors out of the tube as you can. So instead of using 20 tubes of paint with different colors, maybe use 10, and if you have to get to a color that is not in a tube, mix it rather than trying to find it at the store. And that made for a much more harmonious painting. She was also, and I really appreciated this, she was also a real strong proponent of using your finger for painting. And that was when I started studying with her. It was the first time I started wearing gloves to paint. Before I never did because it got in the way. I thought they were not necessary, but she was a real proponent of using your finger to kind of blur the lines and make paintings a little bit more painterly. That's a term that I've kind of learned in my course of taking classes. Make the lines a little bit more painterly, make them more blurred. And then the last teacher I painted with, Jeff Yeomans, who's a professional painter locally, was a real proponent of using grids. He painted a lot of figures. So he would teach using grids to kind of break the painting into separate blocks and kind of concentrating on those blocks. And that was very helpful when it came to figures, because with figures, the angle of anything, the angle of the body, the hand, the arms, was so critical that if you didn't use grids, you were, or at least I was more likely to, at the end of the painting, say, well, that arm is not quite right, or those two figures are not as close together as they should be. And then, of course, by that time, it's too late to go back and change things. So different teachers have different kind of techniques that they like to use. I think a lot of it reflects on the type of painting that they once did or still do. But to get back to your question, Galina, I have always gotten more from teachers who were critical, not critical in a mean way, but basically kind of looking at your painting and really breaking it apart and saying, well, I would have done this a little bit differently. Or next time, why don't you try doing this a little bit differently and do this instead? I learned a lot from that.
So I have one comment about what you just said, Homer, and then a final question for me. And I really like what you said about your first instructor encouraging you to just get everything on the canvas and cover the canvas first and then refine from there. I recently heard about writer's block, and this person was saying that there's no such thing as writer's block. It's just fear of getting started. And basically just write. Just put a whole bunch of stuff onto the page, write it all out, and then start to refine from there. And I tried using that mindset, and I found it to be a lot easier and a lot less daunting when I thought that way. Just
Right.
spit it all out, just vomit it on the page, and then start to clean it up. And then you don't have to worry about trying to come up with the perfect prose at every step.
Right. Well, I had a hard time with that in the beginning, and I think that that difficulty came from my profession. Leela once said to me, and I think it's so true. Leela said to me once that there's only one profession that is harder to teach how to paint than doctors, and that is engineers. Engineers want to get every line straight. They'll get a protractor out and they'll get every angle straight. But doctors are not far behind, and I think that that was something that I had to get over. Unfortunately, I think that when you go from medicine to painting, your expectations are a little bit different. I think they're unreasonably higher than they should be when you paint. When I first started painting, I was kind of I would be disappointed if not every single painting turned out the way that I wanted it to turn out. I think that realistically, I haven't read this anywhere, but I think realistically, if you were a painter and one painting out of every 5 or 6 was successful, I think you would consider yourself to be a pretty good painter, But in medicine, that doesn't really apply. I mean, if I were doing surgery on 6 patients and only one of them got through surgery without any complications, I'd be a pretty terrible surgeon, But I had to kind of get past that, get past that pressure that every single painting had to turn out perfect and had to be a good enough painting to put on a website, or a good enough painting to bring to a show, or a good enough painting to sign and put in a frame.
I think that's a nice segue into my final question, which is, what advice would you have for someone who is thinking about starting to paint, thinks that this might be something they'll really enjoy, but they haven't gone through the journey yet, and they're thinking about getting into it? What advice would you have for that person to get started?
Well, I would say that I would encourage anyone who was thinking about doing something like this to go ahead and do it. Kind of like what you said about writing, just kind of throw yourself into it. I think that there's probably a lot more artistic ability that we all have than we think. I think it's very critical to find a good teacher to start off with. Students don't have to stick with a particular teacher forever and ever, and students can eventually kind of branch out on their own. But I think to kind of get the basic concepts of, what values mean, what colors mean, what shapes mean, and kind of how to put together a painting is probably the most important thing. And then I would say that the other thing that I would advise someone trying to get into this is not to have real high expectations in the beginning, and to learn how to end a painting. That's kind of a difficult thing to do. I think I wrote to Galena that some of my paintings, she asked me last night, which ones of my paintings in the blog spot were newer. And my response was that the earlier ones, I mean, the first ones that you see are newer, but there are some that I painted maybe years ago that I would kind of pick at, would kind of refine or come back and tweak. And that's not necessarily a good thing to do. You can overwork a painting and make it less spontaneous than it should be. And it doesn't make it a better painting to continue to do that. So I would say that, to someone trying to get into this, I would encourage them to do it. I would encourage them to find a good teacher. I would encourage them to not be overly critical and not have high expectations, and finish a painting, put it away, start off with a new painting.
That's a great advice.
It's great advice. I was going to say the same thing. We've covered a lot of incredible ground. I really love the comparisons between being a doctor and being a tennis player and being an artist, and how you come at it from a problem-solving perspective. This gave me a whole lot of new ways to think about the process of painting. It's very interesting. And your work is beautiful, Homer. We were
thanks.
Amazed at the sheer body of work that we were scrolling and scrolling and scrolling. And it was hard to scroll because each one, you just wanted to stop and stare at it. I loved how you had backgrounds in soft focus, like you would see in an actual photograph, for instance. And yet, like you say, I mean, there was a lot of painterliness to the paintings. Nothing was super sharply defined. And that made it really interesting to look at. I really enjoyed looking at your painting.
I was so drawn to your metallic surfaces and your reflective surfaces. That's just amazing.
Well, that was one of the first things that got me interested. I would basically remember going to museums with Vicky and kind of seeing a painting of a glass of water, a glass of wine, or maybe some metallic vase. And I would kind of wonder, I would say to myself, how does a painter actually do that? And as it is, as it turns out, it's not that hard to do. There are other things that are much more challenging than painting a glass of water or a glass of wine.
We want to thank you for being on our show. This was wonderful. Thank you for taking the time to talk with us.
Yeah, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Good to see both of you guys.
Likewise. We look forward to seeing more of your art very soon.
Yes.
Okay.
I don't know what to say. I actually don't know where to start.
Well, I can help.
Okay.
I think, his approach to art being more of a technical activity, a more of a problem-solving task, as opposed to purely creative, emotional process. Different, but very common, way to look at creating art.
Yeah, well, there's something else stood out to me as well, that he's actually talking about trying to overcome his professional perfectionism and try to get looser. So to me, it sounded like he is looking for himself on that path to the quote unquote real creativity, the way he puts it, when you can actually paint from your own mind without having a reference point. And yeah, I cannot disagree that painting techniques are skills like any other skills that you can train, and you can be a very decent painter. But I also think that you have to have something within you to represent even the subject from your reference point in a certain way that it will speak to the viewer. And Homer definitely has that.
His approach, when he's doing it, he's very consciously thinking about the technical aspect and the problem-solving aspect of it. But the result is a very creative and beautiful body of work, which you will definitely enjoy seeing. We'll have links to it from our website. We have a blog post coming as well.
Yes, there will be an adjacent blog post and a link to Homer's portfolio. I totally think that he needs to stop playing tennis and devote himself to art. That's my professional opinion.
Well, he apparently is a darn good tennis player. I wouldn't want to take that away from him. So, there's the genius of the and versus the tyranny of the or. And so why can't he do both? Make sure you share this podcast with your friends. We're young, but we're mighty, and we want to grow this thing like a weed. The more people that appreciate art, whether you're an artist or your friend's an artist or you just love art, this podcast is for you.
We really need your support, and we appreciate everyone who's listening. We do it for you guys.
Yep. So visit us at intheartscene.com. It's spelled exactly how it sounds. Make sure to find us on Instagram and Facebook. And
we're on LinkedIn. We're on Pinterest.
We're all over the place. Share us, like us in your podcast player of choice, and we will see you in the art scene.